Have you ever wondered why the Bible describes Samson as a man of impossible strength, yet never mentions that he had big muscles? We have all seen the paintings of a bodybuilder with massive arms and a thick chest. But if Samson looked like a giant, the Philistines would have known the source of his power. They would not have needed to hire Delilah to find his secret. The truth is much more terrifying. Samson looked like an ordinary man, yet he possessed a secret power that defied the laws of physics. Was he the first genetic experiment? Was he a biological weapon designed by God to fight the giants? Today we are opening a forensic file on the most dangerous man in biblical history. We are not looking at a love story. We are investigating a mission to extract Samson's Nephilim strength. We must begin our investigation by looking at the physical evidence. When we read the book of Judges, we are not just reading a story. We are reading a series of impossible physical events. Modern science tells us that there is a limit to human potential. There is a limit to how much weight a bone can hold before it snaps. There is a limit to how much force a tendon can pull before it tears. Samson broke every single one of these limits. Let us look at the first piece of evidence, the Lion of Timnath. The Bible tells us in Judges chapter 14 that a young lion roared against him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. He tore the lion apart as one would have torn a young goat. He had nothing in his hand. Stop and think about the biomechanics of this action. A lion is a killing machine. It has thick skin, dense muscle, and heavy bones. To tear a lion apart with bare hands requires thousands of pounds of force. If a normal man, even a very strong man, tried to pull a lion apart, his own body would fail first. His pectoral muscles would detach from his chest. His ligaments would snap like rubber bands. His own bones would shatter under the pressure of his own muscular contraction. Physics dictates that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. But Samson did not suffer any injury. This tells us something crucial about his biology. His bones were not like our bones. His tendons were not like our tendons. They had to be super dense to withstand the force he was generating. Now let us look at the second piece of evidence, the jawbone of the donkey. In Judges chapter 15, Samson finds a fresh jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 men with it. We have heard this story so many times that we miss the miracle. Have you ever held a dry bone? It is light and porous. It is brittle. If you take a jawbone and hit it a metal helmet or a hard skull with full force, the jawbone breaks. It shatters on the first or second impact. Yet Samson used this single object to strike 1,000 times. He was hitting armored soldiers. He was hitting shields and skulls. By all laws of physics, that bone should have turned to dust in his hands within minutes. Why did it not break? We must consider a terrifying possibility. The power was not just in his muscles. The energy was flowing through him. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord acted as a kinetic shield, hardening the object he held. Samson was not just a strong man, he was a conduit for a supernatural energy that defied material science. But the most undeniable evidence is found in Judges chapter 16, the gates of Gaza. This is the feat that proves Samson was structurally different from any human who has ever lived. The Philistines locked him in the city. At midnight, Samson arose. He took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts. He went away with them, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of an hill that is before Hebron. Let us analyze the geography and the weight. Archaeologists estimate that the gates of a fortified city like Gaza, along with the posts and the heavy locking bar, would weigh several tons. This is the weight of a large truck. But lifting it is not the hardest part. The Bible says he carried them to Hebron. The distance from Gaza to Hebron is roughly 40 miles, and it is not a flat road. Hebron is situated high in the mountains. Samson carried tons of wood and metal uphill for 40 miles. A world-class powerlifter can lift a heavy weight for a few seconds, but to carry it for miles requires a completely different type of system. No human spine could support that vertical load for that duration without collapsing. The vertebrae would be crushed, the discs would explode, the heart would explode trying to pump blood to the muscles. Yet Samson did it. This leads us to the only logical conclusion. This was not muscle. If Samson had muscles big enough to do this, he would have been 20 feet tall. He would have been a giant. But the Bible implies he looked normal. This was the anomaly that kept the Philistine lords awake at night. They saw a man of average size performing feats that even their own giants could not do. They realized that his strength was not anatomical. It was genetic. It was hidden in his code. The Philistines were terrified because they could not see the source of the threat. They were dealing with a man whose very cellular structure had been modified by the divine. And as we are about to discover, the Philistines were uniquely qualified to understand this threat. They knew exactly what looking at because they were not entirely human themselves. They were the guardians of the giant gene.
To understand the experiment, we must identify the observers. We often think of the Philistines as just another enemy army in the Old Testament. We picture them as normal soldiers with swords and shields who just happen to hate the Israelites. But history and scripture tell us a very different story. The Philistines were not natives of the land of Canaan. They were invaders from the sea, and they brought with them a very specific genetic history. If we look at the book of Amos, chapter 9, verse 7, God asks a rhetorical question. He says, "Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor?" Caphtor is the ancient name for the island of Crete. Genesis chapter 10 confirms this lineage. It traces the Philistines back to the Cusluhim, a branch of the descendants of Ham. Why does this matter? Because everywhere this specific bloodline went, we find stories of high technology, megalithic architecture, and giant humanoids. But the smoking gun is found in the book of Joshua. This is the piece of evidence that changes everything. Before Samson was born, Joshua led the children of Israel into the Promised Land with a mandate to destroy the Anakim. The Anakim were the giants. They were the descendants of the Nephilim. They were the reason the spies were terrified 40 years earlier. Joshua waged a war of extermination against these hybrid tribes. Listen closely to what the Bible records in Joshua chapter 11, verse 22. It says, "There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained." Read those names again. Gaza, Gath, Ashdod. These are not random locations. These are the 5 major capital cities of the Philistines. The Bible is explicitly telling us that when the giants were hunted down, they fled to the Philistines for protection. The Philistine cities became the last refugee camps for the Anakim. This means that the Philistine culture was completely integrated with the giant bloodline. They lived with them, they bred with them, they served as their guardians. This is why Goliath came from Gath. Goliath was not a genetic mutation. He was not a freak of nature. He was a remnant. He was proof that the DNA of the Watchers was still active in the Philistine population. When Samson walked into Gaza, he was not walking into a normal city. He was walking into the last stronghold of the Nephilim on earth. This context explains the obsession of the Philistine lords. Imagine their perspective. For centuries, they believed they held the ultimate power. They had the giants. They had warriors who were 9 feet tall. They had the blood of the ancients. They were the superior race. Their religion centered on Dagon. This was a deity often depicted as a hybrid fishman. This imagery goes back to the ancient Mesopotamian entities known as the Apkallu, or the Watchers, who brought forbidden knowledge to humanity. The Philistines worshipped the concept of hybridity. Then, out of the hills of Dan, comes Samson. He is a solitary man. He is not 9 feet tall. He does not wear heavy armor like Goliath. He looks like a simple Hebrew peasant. Yet this small man does things that even their giants cannot do. He tears lions in half. He uproots city gates. He slaughters entire battalions. This terrified them, but it also fascinated them. To the Philistine lords, Samson was a paradox. He broke their understanding of biology. If a giant like Goliath had big muscles and big bones, his strength made sense. It was proportional. But Samson had small muscles and infinite strength. This signaled to them that the God of Israel had developed a new kind of technology. It was a compact, high-efficiency power source that made their own giant genetics look obsolete. This creates a motive that goes beyond war. This was not just about territory. This was about genetic supremacy. The Philistines realized that they were losing the biological arms race. They looked at Samson and they saw a superior specimen. They did not just want to kill him. If they just wanted him dead, they could have shot him with arrows from a distance. They could have poisoned his food. But they didn't. They kept trying to capture him. They kept trying to bind him. Why? Because you do not destroy a prototype. You study it. You capture it alive so you can reverse engineer it. They needed to know how a normal human frame could hold the power of a god. They suspected that the secret lay somewhere in his biology. They knew it had to be a covenant, a ritual, or a substance that altered his physical state. And since they could not defeat him on the battlefield, they decided to move the war to a different front. They needed an infiltrator. They needed someone who could get close enough to examine the specimen without triggering his defenses. They needed a biological hacker. And this is where Delilah enters the investigation. She was not just a beautiful woman looking for love. She was a highly paid operative on a mission to crack the most complex genetic code in history. The Philistines were betting everything on the hope that if they could understand Samson, they could upgrade themselves. They wanted to steal the power of heaven to reclaim their dominance on earth.
If the Philistines were the observers, then we must ask, who was the architect? To understand how Samson functioned, we have to go back to the moment of his conception. This was not a normal pregnancy. The Bible is very specific in Judges chapter 13. Samson's mother was barren. She could not have children. From a biological standpoint, her reproductive system was shut down. There was no life in her womb. Then, an entity appeared to her. The Bible calls him the angel of the Lord. But pay close attention to how the woman describes him. She does not say he looked like a beautiful winged creature. She told her husband that his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, very terrible. The word terrible here means awesome, frightening, and imposing. This was a being of immense power. This entity did not just give a prophecy, he gave a prescription. He intervened in her biology to reactivate her womb. But he did more than that. He gave her a strict set of instructions on how to manufacture the child. This was not just a baby. This was a project. This was the creation of a biological weapon designed to destroy the Philistine giant hybrids. The angel commanded that the child must be a Nazirite unto God from the womb. We often view the Nazirite vow as a religious choice, a sign of extreme holiness. But let us look at it through the lens of a maintenance protocol. If you build a high-performance machine, like a fighter jet or a race car, you cannot put regular fuel in it. You cannot treat it like a normal vehicle. If you do, the engine will explode. The Nazirite vow was the operating manual for Samson's genetically modified body. Let us analyze the first rule of the protocol: no wine and no strong drink. The angel was so serious about this that he told the mother not to drink wine even while she was pregnant. The chemical environment of the womb had to be pristine. Why? We know scientifically that alcohol is a neurotoxin. It depresses the central nervous system, it slows down reaction times, and alters the chemistry of the blood. For a normal human, a glass of wine is fine, but Samson was not normal. His nervous system was designed to carry a voltage of supernatural power that would kill an ordinary man. His blood had to be chemically pure to act as a superconductor. If he introduced alcohol into his system, it might have dampened the signal. It might have corroded the connection between his physical body and the spiritual power source. He needed absolute clarity and chemical purity to function as a vessel for the divine energy. Now consider the second rule. He was forbidden to come near a dead body. In the book of Numbers, chapter 6, the law states that a Nazirite cannot go near a corpse even if it is his own father or mother. On a religious level, this is about ritual purity, but let us look deeper. Death carries a specific frequency. It is the frequency of decay, of breakdown, of entropy. Samson was an agent of life and energy. His body was a battery charged with the living power of God. To touch a dead body is to connect with the void. It introduces a spiritual and biological static into the system. Bacteria, disease, and the very aura of death could have acted as a grounding wire, draining his charge. The protocol was designed to keep his biofield completely isolated from the contamination of death, so that he could remain at peak energy levels. This leads us to the mechanism of his power. The Bible uses a very specific phrase over and over again. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him." Notice the wording. It does not say Samson was always strong. He did not walk around crushing rocks with every step. He looked normal. He acted normal. But when the moment of combat arrived, something happened. This was the activation sequence. Imagine a dormant system coming online. When the Spirit came upon him, it was like a massive surge of adrenaline, but on a supernatural scale. His heart rate would spike. His super dense bones would lock into place. His muscles would flood with divine energy. This was not human strength. This was the same power that formed the stars, channeled through the nervous system of a single man. The Nazirite protocol was the safety lock. As long as Samson kept the rules, as long as he kept his blood pure from alcohol and his aura pure from death, his body remained a suitable container for this surge. If he broke the protocol, the container would be compromised. The connection would falter. The angel of the Lord knew exactly what he was doing. He was engineering a hero who could interface with the power of heaven. Samson was the ultimate weapon calibrated for one specific frequency. But every weapon has a failsafe. Every lock has a key. And while the Philistines couldn't break the machine from the outside with swords and spears, they began to wonder if they could dismantle it from the inside. They realized that Samson was disciplined, but he was also lonely. He was a man set apart, living by strict rules that no one else understood, and this isolation was his vulnerability. The Philistines did not need a warrior to defeat him. They needed a scientist who could exploit his human desires to uncover the final component of the protocol. They needed to know about the hair. And for that mission, they activated their most dangerous asset, a woman named Delilah.
We have arrived at the most misunderstood chapter in the life of Samson. For generations, we have been taught that the story of Samson and Delilah is a romance. We are told it is a tragedy about a hero who fell in love with the wrong woman. But if we look at the text with the eyes of an investigator, we do not see a love story. We see a military operation.
we see a high-stakes extraction mission. And we see Delilah not as a lover, but as a biohacker running a series of clinical trials. To understand the severity of this mission, we must follow the money. Judges chapter 16, verse 5 contains a detail that is often overlooked. The lords of the Philistines came up to Delilah and made her an offer. They said, "Entice him and see wherein his great strength lies, and we will give you, each one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver." Let us do the math. There were 5 lords of the Philistines, representing the 5 city-states. If each lord gave 1,100 pieces, that is a total of 5,500 pieces of silver. To put this in perspective, later in the Bible, in the book of Zechariah, the price of a slave was 30 pieces of silver. Delilah was offered nearly 200 times the value of a human life. In modern terms, this was not a bribe. This was the equivalent of a national defense budget. The Philistines were not paying for a seduction. They were paying for a scientific breakthrough. They were purchasing the blueprint for a super weapon. This proves that Samson was considered a national security threat of the highest order. The Philistine leadership was willing to bankrupt their treasuries to solve the riddle of his DNA. And Delilah was the contractor they hired to solve it. Once the contract was signed, Delilah began her work. She did not use swords or spears. She used the scientific method. She engaged Samson in a game of truth and dare, but in reality, she was conducting a process of elimination. She was running A/B testing to isolate the variable that gave him his power. Let us examine test number 1, the biological variable. Delilah asks him the source of his strength. Samson tells her, "If they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man." A withe is a tough, flexible branch used for tying. But notice the specification. They had to be green. They had to be fresh. They could not be dried out. Why did Samson say this? And why did Delilah believe it? From a magical or scientific perspective, greenwood still contains moisture. It still contains the life force of the plant. Perhaps the theory was that organic material, still alive, could dampen the bioelectrical field of Samson's body. Delilah executed the test. She bound him. She signaled the Philistines lying in wait. But the moment Samson awoke, he snapped the withs as a thread of tow is broken when it touches the fire. The text says, "So his strength was not known." Note that phrase. The experiment failed to produce data. The biological dampening theory was incorrect. Delilah immediately moved to test number 2, the physical variable. She accused him of lying, and he gave her a new parameter. He said, "If they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man." Notice the shift. We moved from organic, living material to manufactured industrial material. New ropes represent the pinnacle of human engineering at that time. They are designed for tensile strength. They are designed to hold heavy loads. This was a stress test. Delilah wanted to know if his power had a physical limit against man-made restraints. She bound him again. The Philistines waited in the shadows, ready to strike if the test succeeded. But Samson broke the new ropes off his arms like a thread. The conclusion was terrifying. His force output exceeded the tensile strength of the strongest materials on Earth. Physics could not contain him. Then came test number 3, the structural variable. This is where the investigation gets dangerously close to the truth.
Samson tells her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web." Stop and look at what is happening here. For the first time, Samson mentions his hair. He mentions the number 7, the number of completion and divinity. He allows Delilah to physically touch his head. She weaves his long hair into a loom, a machine used for making cloth. She fastens it with a pin. She is no longer testing his muscles, she is testing his structure. She is experimenting with the idea that the hair itself acts as a conductor or an anchor. She weaves him into the fabric of the room. When she wakes him up, he doesn't just break the hair, he pulls the entire loom out of the floor. He walks away with the machine attached to his head. The test failed to stop him, but it gave Delilah the most important data point yet. She realized that every time he lied, he was getting closer to the truth. He started with branches, then ropes, then his hair. She knew she was circling the target. The hair was the key. Now we must address the psychological mystery. Why did Samson stay? He was a judge of Israel. He was intelligent. He saw her bind him 3 times. He saw men waiting in the room to kill him. Why did he not leave? Why did he lay his head back down in her lap? Some say it was arrogance. He believed he was a god, untouchable and invincible. He thought he was playing a game with the silly woman. But there is a darker possibility. The title of our file is The Witch Hunter. We must consider the use of pharmakeia. In the ancient world, seduction was often accompanied by the use of potions, herbs, and drugs. The valley of Sorek, where Delilah lived, was famous for its vineyards. Remember the Nazirite protocol. Samson was forbidden to touch wine. He was forbidden to have his mind clouded. Is it possible that Delilah was dosing his food? Was she using herbal concoctions to weaken his will, to induce a state of confusion and compliance? The Bible says she pressed him daily with her words so that his soul was vexed unto death. This describes a man undergoing psychological torture and chemical breakdown. Samson was not just in love. He was intoxicated, either by her manipulation or by actual substances. He was a compromised agent. His judgment was failing. His defenses were crumbling. The biohacker had found a way to bypass his conscious mind. Finally, she delivered the ultimatum. She attacked his identity. She said, "How can you say I love thee when thine heart is not with me?" She demanded the code. She demanded the password to the Nazirite operating system. And Samson, broken, tired, and drugged by her influence, finally gave up the secret. He told her all his heart. He revealed the Nazirite vow. He explained that his hair was not just hair, it was the external sign of an internal covenant. It was the antenna that connected him to the signal of God. If the antenna was cut, the signal would be lost. Delilah did not smile. She did not celebrate. She acted like a cold professional. The Bible says, when Delilah saw that he had told him all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up this once, for he has showed me all his heart." She knew. She analyzed the data, and this time the data made sense. It fit the profile of the Nazirite protocol she had likely heard rumors about. She told the lords to bring the money. The experiment was over. The extraction was ready to begin, and Samson fell asleep on her knees, unaware that the biohacker was about to perform the final surgery that would strip him of his divinity.
We now reach the critical moment of the operation. Samson is asleep on the knees of the agent. The secret has been revealed. But we must pause and ask a fundamental question. Why hair? Of all the ways to seal a covenant, why did God choose hair? For centuries, critics have mocked this detail. They say it sounds like a fairy tale. They say it makes no sense that a man's physical strength would be tied to a protein filament growing out of his skin. But if we look at hair through the lens of biology and ancient knowledge, we find that it is far more than just a cosmetic feature. It is a biological instrument. Hair is an extension of the nervous system. In the scientific world, we know that hair is made of keratin, the same material as our fingernails and skin. But the root of each hair is embedded in a follicle that is surrounded by nerve endings. It is highly sensitive to touch, to vibration, and to changes in the atmosphere. In many ancient cultures, long hair was considered a sixth sense. There were reports during modern wars of native trackers who lost their ability to sense the enemy when their hair was cut. They claimed that their hair acted as an antenna, picking up subtle signals from the environment that the conscious mind could not process. If we apply this concept to Samson, the picture changes completely. Samson was not just a strong man, he was a receiver. His body was the hardware, designed to hold the power. But his hair was the antenna, designed to receive the signal. The energy of God did not originate inside Samson. It came from outside. It came from the Spirit of the Lord. The long, seven-braided locks of his head were the conductive wires that allowed that external frequency to flow into his internal system. The Bible gives us a linguistic clue to confirm this. The word Nazirite comes from the Hebrew root word nezer. The word nezer literally means a crown or a diadem. It implies separation and consecration. But a crown is something you wear on your head to signify authority and connection to a higher power. Samson was wearing a biological crown. He was wearing a receiver dish made of organic material that kept him constantly connected to the source of his power. As long as the antenna was intact, the download of power was continuous. Delilah understood this. Once Samson explained the mechanism, she knew she had to perform a surgical removal of the device. The Bible gives us a very specific detail in Judges chapter 16, verse 19. It says, "She called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head." Notice that Delilah did not do the cutting herself. She called for a specialist. Why? Because this was not a haircut. This was an amputation. She needed it done quickly, silently, and completely. She needed to sever the connection without waking the subject. The text says they shaved off the 7 locks. The number 7 represents completion in biblical numerology. By removing all 7, she completely dismantled the array. She stripped the insulation off the wire. She broke the circuit. What happened next is the most tragic moment in the file. The Bible says she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. The physical reaction was immediate. The energy field collapsed. The super-dense bones lost their reinforcement. The muscles lost their divine charge. Then she woke him up. She shouted, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." Samson woke up and said to himself, "I will go out as at other times before and shake myself." This is the terrifying part. He did not know the signal was gone. He felt normal. He stood up, expecting the surge of adrenaline, expecting the familiar rush of the Spirit's power. He tried to engage the system, but the screen was black. The connection was dead. The Bible delivers the final verdict in a chilling sentence, "And he knew not that the Lord was departed from him." This was not just a spiritual statement, it was a functional one. The source had been disconnected. The bioweapon had been deactivated. Samson was standing in the room with the Philistines, but he was no longer the Nephilim killer.
He was just a man with genetic potential that could no longer be accessed. The experiment was a success. Delilah had proven that the strength was not inherent to the subject. It was dependent on the interface. By removing the interface, she rendered the weapon useless. The Philistines did not hesitate. They did not try to kill him immediately. They had what they wanted. They had the specimen. They had the man who carried the code, and now that he was powerless, they could take him to their secure facility for the final phase of their project. They were done testing. Now they wanted to harvest.
The capture of Samson leads us to the darkest question of this entire investigation. Why did the Philistines keep him alive? Think about it logically. Samson was a mass murderer in their eyes. He had burned their fields. He had slaughtered their armies. He had humiliated their gods. Any normal military force would have executed him publicly, on the spot. They would have cut off his head and paraded it through the streets of Gaza. But they did not kill him. Instead, the Bible tells us in Judges chapter 16, verse 21, that the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Why go to all this trouble? Why invest resources to feed and house your worst enemy? The answer is terrifying if we consider the Philistines' obsession with genetics. They did not kill him because he was too valuable. He was the only successful prototype of a super soldier they had ever seen. The blinding was a strategic move. Yes, it was a punishment, but it was also a security measure. By blinding him, they ensured he could not see where he was being taken. He could not identify the scientists or the strange rituals they were performing around him. He was trapped in total darkness, a subject with no sensory input. Then there is the matter of the mill. We are told he was grinding grain. This is hard physical labor. Usually this work was done by animals. By forcing Samson to push the heavy grinding wheel day after day, they were not just humiliating him, they were maintaining him. They were forcing him to exercise. They needed his body to stay physically fit. They needed his testosterone levels to remain high. We must ask the uncomfortable question: why does a geneticist keep a prize specimen alive and healthy to breed him? It is highly probable that the prison house in Gaza was actually a breeding facility. The Philistines, who had lost the purity of their Enochim giant bloodline, may have attempted to use Samson as a stud. They wanted to harvest his seed. They wanted to see if they could impregnate Philistine women with his DNA to create a new generation of warriors who possessed the strength of Samson, but the loyalty of a Philistine. They wanted to steal the blessing of God and graft it into the bloodline of Dagon. This was the ultimate violation. They were trying to hijack the biological weapon for their own use. But in their arrogance, the Philistine scientists made a fatal miscalculation. They focused so much on the biology that they forgot the theology. They forgot that the covenant was written in the hair, and hair grows back. Verse 22 contains the turning point of the entire saga. It says simply, "Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven." Day by day, in the darkness of the prison, the keratin filaments were pushing out of his scalp. The antenna was repairing itself. The connection to the divine signal was being re-established. The Philistines did not notice. They saw a blind, broken slave. They did not realize that the receiver was coming back online. Then came the day of the great celebration. The Bible says, "The lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god." This was not a small party. 3,000 men and women were on the roof alone. This included all the lords, the generals, and the elite of Philistine society.
They brought Samson out to make sport of him. They wanted to parade their captured specimen before their fish god. They placed him between the two middle pillars upon which the house stood. This temple was a marvel of engineering, likely built with the sacred geometry known to the builders of that era. The entire weight of the structure rested on two central columns. Samson asked the young man leading him to let him feel the pillars. He was blind, but he could feel the vibration of the structure. He placed his hands on the stone. At that moment, the circuit was closed. The hair had grown, the antenna was ready. Samson prayed one final prayer. He said, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once." He was not asking for muscle. He was asking for a surge. He was asking for an energy overload. Suddenly, the Spirit of the Lord rushed into him one last time. The voltage was immense. It was a suicide mission. Samson pushed with all his might. The supernatural force transferred from his body into the structural integrity of the temple. The stone pillars, which could hold tons of weight, shattered under the kinetic energy. The temple collapsed. It was a catastrophic structural failure. The roof came down on the lords, the scientists, the breeders, and the thousands of spectators. Samson died with them, but his death was a strategic victory. By bringing down the temple, he did not just kill the leadership of the Philistines. He destroyed the breeding program. He buried the secrets of his DNA under a mountain of rubble. He wiped out the entire project in a single moment of divine judgment. The mystery of Samson is not about a man who lost his way. It is about a warrior who infiltrated the heart of the enemy, endured the ultimate violation, and sacrificed himself to stop a genetic abomination. The Philistines wanted to steal the power of God. Instead, they were crushed by it. And the secret of the Nephilim strength remained buried in the ruins of Gaza, waiting for us to uncover the truth thousands of years later. This concludes the file on Samson.